Welcome back to Behind the Bastards. I'm doing my Halloween voice because this will probably come out pretty close to Halloween.
Yeah.
Miles,
and
have
it's
you
scary.
ever poisoned?
And it's
have you
scary.
ever poisoned candy?
Have I ever poisoned candy?
Yeah, anyone's candy. Have you ever poisoned a child's candy, Miles?
No, I used to poison mine to get out of school, though.
Yeah. We'll leave that a maybe. Miles, are you ready to get back into part 2 here? Miles Gray, host of the Daily Zeitgeist.
I'm so ready. I'm so ready.
Excellent.
Because like I said, I feel like mans are going to turn it around.
Yes, some men are going to fluence themselves into a healthier place. I feel like it's going to happen.
I hated that.
We've got manfluenza over here. You know
I hated that also.
Menfluenza.
Concerned about men, including both of you.
So I'm going to start this episode by returning to the distant past and the next era of masculinity gurus to come around after the stock market collapsed. One of the first guys through that particular door was a man that you probably heard his name, Charles Atlas, who in 1930 started running a series of ads in Popular Mechanics bragging, "Let me prove in 7 days that I can make you a new man." Now, Atlas was obviously not the first guy to promise insecure men that he could make them huge and that in doing so, he would solve every problem in their lives. But he was probably the most muscular of the first generation of these guys.
Right.
As the Depression faded and the war years came, Atlas was also the first to realize that magazines meant for mature adults like Popular Mechanics weren't the best place to target insecure young men. To do that, you had to reach them in comic books. Charles placed ads in every comic under the sun. Because this was a hungrier era in general, he didn't tend to focus on trying to get men, to lose weight or whatever. That really wasn't a thing, right? Trying to convince them that they're fat and out of shape. That wouldn't really work in this era because everyone's starving. So instead, he mocked them for being too skinny. This tactic culminated in his famous 97-pound weakling ads. Here's an early example, right? "And to think they called me skinny. Give me 15 minutes a day and I'll give you a new body." And then we see a very oily Italian man, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just as
beautiful.
shiny as the day is long.
Leopard print undies.
Shining portrait of
painted on
masculinity.
him. There's a little box underneath him, right above his knees that says, "Charles Atlas, holder of the title, the world's most perfectly developed man." Now, that you're wondering, where does that title come from? Who made up that? Who decided that?
Yeah,
we'll talk about it.
He did.
Now, what really made Charles stand out in a crowded field of fitness gurus was his laser focus on fucking with the self-confidence of boys and young men reading his ads, right? He was the guy who was like, "I'm just going to use body dysmorphia to make all of my money."
Right, to make money,
And he really did it, probably the first guy I saw doing it in a really organized way that I've found that's really unhealthy in a very modern way, where he just wants you to feel bad about your body.
Right.
His most popular 97-pound weakling ads were comics themselves, so he is really targeting kids to make them hate their bodies. And the premise of most of these was that a bully at the beach mocks our protagonist for being scrawny. In the comic I have here, he's saying, "Hey, skinny, your ribs are showing. Don't let him hit you, Joe. Watch what you say, fella. Shut up, you bag of bones." And then the muscular guy hits our hero, who takes Charles Atlas's getting jacked course, becomes swole, and then goes back to the beach to beat the shit out of this guy and presumably take back his woman, right?
Right. That's how it works.
Yeah. After he beats up the beach bully, his girlfriend says, "Oh, Joe, you are a real He-Man after all."
Oh, Jesus. Thank you
Great
for
dialogue.
winning me back.
Yeah. This comic does not pass the Bechdel test.
I did not enjoy that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, horrible stuff.
Yep.
Now, it's not going to surprise you to learn that Charles Atlas was not his real name.
Oh, really?
Because that's not anyone's real name. What is funny is that his real name also sounds fake. He was born Angelo Siciliano, which sounds like what J.K. Rowling would have named an Italian wizard. Just not a real person's name.
Yeah. Angelo Sicilianus.
Yeah, Sicilianus. Italian wizard. Now, before he was a muscle salesman, he was a poor kid in Brooklyn who couldn't afford a YMCA membership and tried several fad workouts of the day without results. Siciliano thus fell for the con before he got in on it himself, treating Bernard McFadden's physical culture magazine as the Bible and hassling strongmen at weightlifting competitions to learn their secrets. He would later claim that the infamous 97-pound weakling story had its origins in his real life, that was a thing that actually happened to him as a kid, that he had sand kicked in his face by a bully, and then my favorite part of this is because there weren't no Charles Atlas classes to take when he was bullied as a kid. He went to the zoo where he found out the secrets of muscle growth by watching a lion. Because his whole program was like calisthenics based. It was lions have muscles and they don't lift weights, so it must be a calisthenics problem.
Holy shit. Also, I also love that
logic.
He just like ran down like muscle men from the circus to be like, hey, what's your secret? What's your secret?
Hey,
what's your secret?
He would go to like muscle shows and then would like annoy them afterwards, being like, hey man, how'd you get so big? How'd you get so huge?
It's like, I don't know. Lifting a shit ton of weight.
They ate nothing but beef steak and picked up heavy things, bro. Yeah. It was like the 19 teens.
Just raw ground beef, man. Room temperature raw ground beef.
Just shoveling it in their mouths.
Icarus.
Yeah. Now, whatever his real secret, Siciliano did figure out how to get swole, and he made his living as a circus strongman until in 1922 he met a homeopathic doctor who'd written for Physical Culture and hired him to author a fitness course he could sell in magazines. He changed his name to Charles Atlas, and the rest was history. Now, I looked into the case of like, who declared him the world's most perfectly developed man? And Wikipedia says there's no evidence that he ever won this. This is just a thing he declared himself. But I found another source that I trust implicitly, barbend.com, which offers a free arm training ebook to readers that claims, with citations, that he did in fact win a Most Handsome Man contest held by Bernard McFadden and a subsequent America's Most Perfectly Developed Man contest held also by Bernard McFadden. So, you know, maybe it's kind of legit, although he was sort of working for the guy. So,
right.
Now, Atlas was absolutely a grifter, but he came far enough back that he was at least fun, right? In his day, it was enough to be huge and make kids feel bad about their bodies. Today, his descendants, guys like Andrew Tate, have to do that. And, you know, they also have to sell like supplements and shit, right? They have to get into all this culture war shit, right? It's not just, you can't just pose naked and offer health and dieting tricks anymore, right? You have to have a place in the culture wars, right? You have to find a way to like make people think that by listening to your shit, they're part of like a great and vicious struggle, right? Otherwise, there's just nothing, you kind of get lost by the wayside without that. And I don't know why. I think some of this has to do with the fact that in Charles Atlas's day, they didn't really know how people got big, right? They generally knew that you had to lift heavy things, but there was a lot less was known about like sports nutrition and the like. A lot less was known about how to work out in order to maximize muscle growth, and steroids weren't really a thing. Right now we have, thank God, steroids.
Thank God the anabolics came online, baby.
So it's easier. People can get swole pretty easily if they have time and money nowadays, right?
And the back acne's free.
And the back acne's free, right? As is the HGH gut. You too can look like Joe Rogan.
Hey, I like to call it organ enlargement. All right? Don't call it an AIDS. That's what's happening. My organs are becoming oversized in my body.
He has the massive guts of a healthy man. Yeah. Now, I want to, so it's like, think about that guy who compared himself to The Rock before getting his legs butchered, right? Just the fact that you're shredded isn't going, like, people aren't confident at all as a result of that anymore. It doesn't bring you the same, it used to be if you were huge, maybe that was enough to feel like a big man. Nowadays, it just really makes you feel like one of the herd. So these guys who, you know, are essentially doing the same thing Atlas was, they have to sell themselves as like culture war icons too, right? In part because these men are struggling for something that gives them meaning, right? And war is a force that gives us meaning. So they want some sort of like thing to fight for and some sort of leader to like, you know, take the reins, right? And a good example of like how some guys do this is the current panic among right-wing masculinity influencer types over seed oils. Now, one of the major sources of the seed oil panic, and the idea is that seed oils are toxic and they're stopping you from like being muscular. They're killing you. They're basically killing you as a man. They're rendering you infertile, you know, and it's a conspiracy, right? That's kind of the insinuation that the spread of seed oils in cooking is part of a conspiracy to destroy men, you know? Yeah.
It's easier to do that than really zoom out. Yeah, it's the seed oils, man.
Yeah, man.
That's it.
Girls don't like you because all the seed oils. That safflower oil is really fucking you up.
Oh, man. Safflower? I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you, man. I'll pray for you.
It's got to be olive oil, right? Or is olive oil a seed oil? I don't think so. I hope not.
I mean, I guess it comes from the olives themselves. Whatever.
Yeah,
I'm all fucked up on seed oils, man.
Yeah.
You know, what do you want me to do?
All I know is my brother says that there's only to eat avocado oil, and he's a doctor.
He says to eat avocado. Oh, there you go.
I hear that too. It also has a high smoke point, higher smoke point than olive oil. So if you're doing high temperature cooking, I'm like, I can second that.
See, I'm as a masculinity influencer myself, Miles. I cook only with diesel fuel. You know?
Yeah, right.
If it's good enough for my truck, it's good enough for me. Yeah. Oh well, yeah. 10W30. Well, I just put that on some bread. You know, a little bit of salt in there, not too much. You don't want to have too much sodium. Yeah.
Vegemite, gross. Dip my bread in 10W30.
So one of the big names in the seed oils community is Carnivore Aurelius, a Twitter account with more than 300,000 followers. He's done a few things. He was one of these guys who would take pictures of old buildings from the classical era and be like, why can't we make these anymore?
Right.
I mean, we could, bro. We just have other ways of making houses than having men hew granite for 1,000 years. I don't know. We have better materials. If you ever had to walk around on a floor made out of fucking marble when it's raining, we have other ways of building things now.
If you do that now, you're gonna break your little extendo femur bone that you paid $75. You're not gonna be able to keep balance on that.
So he is one of the big guys who is pushing this idea that seed oils are responsible for all of the woes of modern life. And I don't think I need to waste time breaking down why he's wrong, but I will show you a post of his from August of 2023, which I find interesting as a mirror to the Charles Atlas ads that we started this episode with. Before seed oils were invented, everybody was hot and healthy. Less than 10% of people were obese versus 40% today, and CBD was non-existent. But in the last 100 years, seed oil consumption has increased 20 times, and so has disease. Here are studies showing why I don't eat them. And then his evidence is this picture of Atlantic Beach in 1908. Look at that. Look at all these. And what I find interesting here is that if you look at the men in this, they're for one thing, a lot shorter than men today tend to be, and also pretty skinny as a general rule. And if this same picture in 1908 would have been used by Charles Atlas as evidence of how scrawny the average man is and why they need his workout program. They're all wimps. Look at these wimps. They're all going to get sand kicked in their face.
Look at these bags of bone. Absolute embarrassments they are.
Like Chuck Atlas, he just sees targets there, sand kicking targets. Yeah. Like that boy on the left right there with the, you could see him in the left side, bottom side of the picture in the wife beater, black shirt, that guy's getting sand kicked right in his face.
Oh, yeah.
So is the guy, can we call them wife beaters anymore? Is that offensive these days?
Yeah, I think you're supposed to call them tank tops.
Tank tops.
Wink.
Wow, tanks. So the military industrial complex is fine, Miles?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, man. Look, I don't make the rules, man. I don't make the rules. I'm just here to sell seed oils, man.
I did, when I was a kid, that was the only thing people ever called those shirts.
And
no adult was ever able to explain to me, why are they called wife beaters?
No, the other one you heard was a guinea tea. Mm-hmm. Are the other ones and
guinea tea?
Yeah, those are the alternatives, and there were no good options.
Yeah,
to the point now. I remember needing one, and I said it offhandedly. And my partner, Her Majesty, is like, yo, that's not.
Can't call him that anymore.
Don't say that. And I'm like, no, that out loud. Yeah, I don't want to say that in a store.
In the small town I grew up in, they were definitely always called wife beaters. And it was because it was like a shirt people in trailer parks would often wear. And I think probably my mom didn't tell me why it got that name because all of my friends were kids in trailer parks. And she didn't want to talk shit about their dads. But it was I didn't really evaluate that until just now. That oh, yes, it is kind of messed up to call a t-shirt that.
Yeah. Well, look, these are strange times we were dealing with.
Yeah, we're all growing every minute. Anyway, also, we don't have enough black tank tops in our society. It's not a bad look. Not a bad look on those kids. I'm sure they're dead now, but they look nice in a picture.
Hey, you never know. That photo's taken 1908, and
1908,
those they're teenagers
dead now. Yeah, they're dead as hell.
Yeah. Hey, they're making some worms happy though.
Yeah, probably, or at least we're 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Unless
they cremated, which is a better way. But hey, that's
hopefully. Well, we'll see. So yeah, this is I just found it funny that like the same picture that is being like portrayed as this is like how men used to be real men back when all of those men were alive. They were being told you're far too skinny.
But it's the exact same way even with like who's raising our kids, right? It's like the men should be there with the kids, and now it's like you hear people be like,
women are working, they're not raising the kids.
I would never hire a man to babysit. That's just wrong. And you're like, wow, whatever. It's a funhouse mirror depending on where your life's at and where society is.
A certain chunk of the population are just always going to be assholes who need to find a reason why whatever other people are fine with isn't okay and is ruining their lives, because usually they want to make money off of it. Right. You know, like that's just the reality of human beings. And the sooner you make peace with it, the sooner you can just daydream about those people getting hit by buses. So So anyway, I want to read a quote about the fake seed oil crisis by Rolling Stone's E.J. Dixon, just to kind of give you some context on this fun little piece of our culture at the present moment. Carnivore Aurelius is an account dedicated to restoring our ancestral meat-loving lifestyle. Its website also sells a branded bag of beef liver crisps for $89.99. Like other proponents of the carnivore diet, like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, Carnivore Aurelius frequently advocates for traditional family values, tweeting about how feminism is a scam, or idyllic photos of young, beautiful blonde moms with babies with the caption, "Ladies, there's nothing wrong with you if you want this over becoming a partner at a law firm." It has also devoted much space to pushing the evils of seed oils. And my favorite thing about this is, so he's claimed that seed oils are the most destructive force in the world today, and cutting them out of the diet your diet will change your health. And some of his evidence for that is canola oil is literally made from seeds of the rape plant, named after what it will do to your health. And
okay.
I feel like, again, I shouldn't need to say anything here, but I will, which is that rapeseed, which is the unfortunate name of the plant that canola oil comes from. I always thought it was
misspelled whenever I had seen it. I was like,
no, it is an unfortunate name, but it has nothing to do with rape, the thing, right? It comes from the Latin word rapum for turnip, because it's like related to the turnip plant.
Thank God.
Just unrelated.
I thought just some sick fuck was just like, you know what, we're going to name this one. I'm like,
could we have called it Rhapseed? Probably. Yeah. Probably would have been a better idea. But,
Rhapsody, the basement.
Scientists never listen to what I think things should be named.
And I keep telling them, and I keep telling the local police, I'd say it's a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding. He's got good ideas. Listen to him.
Yeah. Speaking of calling the local police, don't do that. Listen to these ads. And we're back. So
we are.
Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time fact-checking Carnivore Aurelius's Twitter account, in part because his fans won't listen to this show. They can barely read. Yeah.
I know about it, but maybe offline you can just tell me why I shouldn't be tripping about it, because I threw out all my.
Oh no, you should be very scared of seed oils.
That's what I thought.
Absolutely, but it's okay. I have a solution for you.
Great.
I have pure chicken liver that did not come from KFC. It just for $300 a pound, I will send it to you via the mail.
Do they have that at KFC?
They used to have it at KFC. Do they not anymore? I haven't gone to KFC in a very long time.
They had chicken liver at KFC? They had fried
chicken livers, and it was pretty good. It was not bad.
Wow. I had no idea.
I like liver. I'm like the liver king,
Yeah.
Yeah, you fry up some liver. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's because of all the steroids. Going back to our journey through time, you might expect the post-war era, right? The late 40s through the 50s to have been a time where the masculinity in crisis thing wouldn't have found much purchase, right? If any period of time men were actually confident in themselves, it mmust have been the post-war years, right? These guys went and they kicked some Nazi ass, and they came back and they bought houses for $13, right?
Yep.
There was never a better time to feel like a man than this, as long as you were white, right?
Yeah. PTSD as a concept didn't really exist. There's no
you're just drinking your way through that, you know? Yeah.
And that poor fucker's shell-shocked.
Yeah. Scared of war.
Why do I scream at my kids every night?
Just go back home and hit your children like the rest of us. Come on now. So This was, however, a time of crisis for masculinity, like literally every other period of modern American history has been. And specifically, it was a time in which American intellectuals first really started to write in a modern sense about the crisis of American masculinity. Now, the fact that this happened makes sense when you put a few more things together. The 1950s is the era in which hyper-violent men's magazines first become really popular. We've done some episodes with Margaret Killjoy where we read through a few of those, but these are like, you see them made fun of on the internet today, magazines where like the cover will be a guy fighting a bunch of crabs, right? Or like wrestling a bear or something while a half-naked woman like looks on, right? Yeah. And if you read interviews with like writers of that era, some of them are pretty open about the fact that they saw their audience as primarily frustrated men who'd been in the military during the war years, but never seen combat. And so they just kind of permanently felt like they'd missed out, right? This thing that would have made me into a man and made me confident, I didn't get. It was kind of stolen from me. Right.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of what Jarhead was about?
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess so. Because like, Desert Storm wasn't really a war. Or
am I misremembering that? I felt like that was like a big part of them being like,
a long time.
I needed to see the pink mist, man. And I never saw it.
It wasn't enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of thing. Anyway.
Yeah. You only get that experience at a guys who didn't see the pink mist, but I guess that makes sense. Yeah. Right. So Witkowski points out that the 1950s was not so much a real crisis of manhood, because again, the average white man in America was doing pretty well in that decade. But instead it was a crisis, and all of these articles about crises in masculinity were the result of a crisis in self-confidence among the kind of men who wrote about culture for a living, right? These were guys who overwhelmingly hadn't fought, right? And these are guys who felt insecure about their position as cultural elites. And this is when you started to also see analysis of like films and TV shows and what they had to say about masculinity, right? One of the shows that really scared these kind of like men writing these articles at the time was The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which poked fun at male authority figures and had competent, witty female characters. Right. And there was a certain kind of public intellectual who was terrified by this. And I'm going to read a quote again from Witkowski's paper. In a fascinating Look magazine article entitled The American Male, Why Do Women Dominate Him?, author J. Robert Moskin opined with harm, it is certain that, as women grow ever more numerous and more dominant, we will have to invent new meanings and myths for maleness in America, because as psychiatrist Dr. Iron J. Rosalind warns, we are drifting toward a social structure made up of he women and she men. Moskin believed men coped with this situation, at least in part, through a set of gendered consumption activities. They drank regularly in commuter cane bar cars, watched televised baseball at home, played golf on weekends, and went on all-male fishing trips. At work, their expense accounts paid for meals at fancy restaurants, and when traveling, for spacious suites and lavish entertaining. Moskin's article clearly focused on the lives of middle-class men like himself. He was senior editor at Look magazine at the time. And that is such a part of like all of these male panic articles, is that like it's just the thing that the guy who was like born into wealth and privilege and is like the head editor at Esquire, it's just what you are scared of, right?
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
You know that you don't have a real job.
Right.
Yeah.
What do? It's like I rank bow ties. And then talk to guys who were just served in a combat zone.
Yeah, I tried to scare men who lived through the SS attacking them about Ozzie and Harriet.
Yeah, right.
Survivors of Bastogne. I try to get to freak out about girls and movies. Awesome stuff, man.
I know how to speak their language, man.
Yeah, it's part of why this is so funny. Again, my grandpa did all of this stuff, went overseas, like fought in wars, and then came back home and would have been the first to tell you that he took every dime he ever made and handed it over to his wife, who managed all of the family finances because he had an 8th grade education and she was really good at math, right? He never felt like less of a man as a result of it either.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think especially that generation was offered, like in that sense. Because so many served, they come back and like maybe just come back and be like, you know what I realized? I don't know shit about math. Yeah. So here, man, just to take these checks. Just keep me fed and I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. So Moskin was a major advocate of the idea that the increasing visibility of gay men, and remember, this is 1950 goddamn 8, was a sign that American men were losing their potency. Now, as opposed to the crisis of manhood around the turn of the century or the 1920s, the chief fear here wasn't that women were ruining young boys. Instead, now it had moved on to a feeling that, in a world of more liberated women, men might have to work harder to find companionship. Now, the manfluencer who sailed into this breach was, kind of ironically, the least toxic guy we're going to talk about in these episodes, Hugh Hefner. And I'm not saying he was a very toxic man, right?
Yeah.
Playboy actually offered, in addition to a new vision of manhood, it offered a new vision of like womanhood that was in some ways less poisonous than what had come before, right? In part because women were not seen in Playboy as a threat, as opposed to women being interested in you was shown as a sign of vigor and success, right? There's a lot that's toxic about that, but it wasn't telling men you should be scared of women because they're working. Right. It was more telling them that your ability to be interesting to these new liberated women is what defines you as a man.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And again, there's toxic stuff there, but it's less poisonous than some of the stuff we've talked about outside.
But at least
of
it's
that,
centered.
right?
It's like, no, man, you're less than and can be better. It's not them. You need to improve yourself.
And you need to meet their new and expanded interests too, by changing and all, largely by buying things, right? By being having a bachelor pad, by purchasing these kind of luxury items,
having multiple rooms that were just gigantic mattresses where untold horrors befell people. But Hugh Hefner is not doing this because it's the good thing to do, but it is like less poisonous than like women are corrupting your children because they're inherently raising them.
Yeah.
Right.
Now Playboy helped ignite a market for a new kind of content aimed entirely at men, as the men's adventure magazines were, but focused on cultivating an image of class and refinement by selling designer clothing and high-end stereo equipment to guys with disposable income. And I also think it's a little less toxic to be like, spend your disposable income on like gym shit or getting taller, as opposed to like, at least you got a stereo if you buy a nice stereo. Maybe it won't actually help you, pick up a lady, but at least you've got a stereo, right?
Yeah, and maybe a grandkid comes across that amplifier and is like, hey, this is actually
you
good
get a fucking
here.
sweet amp. Yeah.
I can sell that. For drugs.
Right. Yes. For the new sign of masculinity. Now, one of the magazines that came from this moment was Esquire, which in 1958 published an article you will see cited in every history of American masculinity. If you read any of these modern day, like published in the last year or two, articles about our current crisis of masculinity, they will all reference an article called The Crisis of American Masculinity by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. Now, Arthur was kind of the platonic ideal of an East Coast intellectual elite. His mom's family had come over on the Mayflower. His dad was a Prussian Jew who'd converted and sent him to Exeter Academy and then Harvard. Over a long career as a political writer, he laid down the definitive first biography of JFK's White House. He convinced RFK to run for president. He then wrote a definitive book about RFK after he was assassinated. He invented the term the imperial presidency. So he's a guy people listened to. And also, I will wager, a guy who knew very little about how the average man in the U.S. felt about masculinity, right? He was not a guy who talked to a lot of blue-collar laborers, His friends are all wealthy and influential elites. In 1958, he decided to write an article that reflected their fears about manhood. Because this was the late 50s, it ran into Esquire next to one of the better cigarette ads I've seen. Miles, does this make you want to Pall Mall? Because I'll tell you what. Oh,
shit.
Man.
Wait, how do I get that flavor
nothing
in
like
my mouth?
Lobster and tobacco, two great tastes that go great together.
Look, I've always said there's nothing that goes together like North Carolinian tobacco and shellfish just mixing in my mouth.
Look, when you're eating the shellfish in Atlantic City, it's been rancid for up to 72 hours before it hits your plate. You need a Pall Mall to coat your throat. That's just a protective effect,
exactly. Yeah, that's how you you fight off the bacterial infection.
It's the only way to survive, eating Atlantic City shellfish.
What a fucking lifestyle. It's like, you want this, bro. We know you want to have a fucking cigarette in one hand.
And a bunch of fucking shrimp.
Sucking down 70-degree, quote-unquote, fresh shrimp.
Yeah. No, man, that's not the way to advertise these things. Hey, boys, want to not eat for days?
Yeah.
Cigarettes.
Yummies. Yeah. Your ribs are showing now, fella.
I do find it interesting, too, that ad uses the term smoked out, no dry smoked out taste, but in a very different term to how we use smoked out today, Miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, hold on, Paul Mall. What are you saying? I'm back.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Schlesinger's article is still deeply influential today, in part because it seems so modern. When he lists archetypes of masculinity, they're all characters from books or movies, and a huge amount of his conclusions on this crisis are based on media. Hemingway's later books, for example, he cites as evidence that men in general have become preoccupied with proving their virility, and I might suggest that Hemingway's lack of self-confidence as he aged might have more to do with why those books were the way they were than how the average American was in 1958. I don't know. Maybe that makes a little more sense to me.
It's not a me problem.
It's not a me problem. Yeah. Obviously, the average Hemingway was channeling Joe Schmo in these books he wrote 14 seconds before blowing his brains out, clearly. Just fascinating conclusions that he came to here. Now, it becomes clear a few paragraphs in that Schlesinger is personally upset with some of the same things that had worried men a generation earlier. Quote, "While men design dresses and brew up cosmetics, women become doctors, lawyers, bank cashiers, and executives. Women now fill many masculine roles," writes the psychologist Dr. Brunel Bettelheim, "and expect their husbands to assume many of the tasks once reserved for their own sex. They see men expanding aggressive force, seizing new domains like a conquering army, while men, more and more on the defensive, are hardly able to hold their own and gracefully accept assignments from their new rulers." Yeah, they're new rulers, women ruling everything in 1958.
How did they see the future?
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Down went patriarchy.
Men are making perfume now. Now, as a liberal intellectual, I will say Arthur doesn't let himself go too far down this road. He does pivot first off, he says that we can't turn things around. Once women have gotten a taste of freedom, they're just going to keep being free. And we just have to accept that, right? And he does point out, he also makes a note that obviously there's a chance that a man who helps out with cleaning the house might just be super confident in his masculinity, right? Maybe a man who literally stabbed SS men to death with frozen icicles doesn't feel emasculated by sweeping, But then we get this line. "But there is more impressive evidence than the helpful husband that this is an age of sexual ambiguity. It appears no accident, for example, that the changing of sex, the Christine Jorgensen phenomenon, so fascinates our newspaper editors and readers, or that homosexuality, that incarnation of sexual ambiguity, should be enjoying a cultural boom new in our history." Now, we've talked about Christine Jorgensen on the show before. She was probably the first transgender woman on American television, She was kind of the first public transgender celebrity in American life. And she was, because she was seen as kind of singular as opposed to a symbol of a community of people.
Right.
I think she actually got a lot less attacked than, we currently see today in the right-wing anti-trans culture war.
Right.
She was kind of described, she was often seen as this is one person who is has this peculiar thing about them, or having on them on TV to talk about it, as opposed to something broader. But it is interesting to me that in this foundational work of American male insecurity, Schlesinger picks on a trans woman, right? That is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
And he's not the only guy doing it, but he does so in a way that's very familiar to the modern era. It's she's a sign that men in general are less confident in being men. Just calling homosexuality a sign of sexual ambiguity, and there's nothing ambiguous about being gay.
Pretty clear.
Right?
Yeah,
pretty clear.
Yeah, I know what I want. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do consider it worthwhile to draw the connection.
Right.
Now, if you can tolerate the way that Schlesinger writes, and that is a big if, his article is extremely funny at points. There's a long segment where he frets over homosexual male characters in fiction and how they suggest men are rejecting normal female desire for full and reciprocal love. And then he writes this incredible paragraph. "One can pause and note why the Gary Coopers, Cary Grants, Clark Gables, and Spencer Tracys continue to play romantic leads opposite girls young enough to be their daughters. It's obviously because so few of the younger male stars can project a convincing sense of masculinity." Yeah, man, that's why. Yeah, that's why, bro. Not a thing that's going to keep happening for all of the time that movies exist. Yes.
Holy shit.
Yes, it's just that these young bucks can't compete with the the masculinity of a Gary Cooper, you know?
Yeah. Oh my
Fucking
God.
hell. Yeah.
Wow.
So funny.
I love that. That's
so funny.
Bottle that up. I love that. Yeah, man. It's because these guys can't get their dicks up.
It's not because a lot of men like very young women. It has to be because of this. Yeah. Absolutely. Just nuts. You know what else is crazy, Miles? The deals that our advertisers will guarantee you. Absolutely so out of their mind that they have been 5150'd and are currently being held in a psychiatric facility against their will. It's really a problem.
Yeah. They're wearing grippy socks.
Yeah. Anyway, we're back. So now Arthur does come, despite some very, very silly lines, to a decent enough conclusion. I will say this is not like a hateful article. It's just deeply out of touch. And his conclusion is that there's no like recovering the old style of masculinity. Things have changed. Women now have much more freedom than they do, and that's not going backwards, right? So, and he specifically states, I'll give him credit for this, he's like, trying to go back to the old style of masculinity is as foolish as trying to bring back white supremacy, right? He describes both as the neuroses of an immature society. And then he goes on to suggest that men need to remake themselves. And this is, again, where you get to, well, you're just a deeply out of touch coastal elite, where he's like, and obviously the way for men to remake themselves is through satire and politics, right? Men should write funny articles for the New Yorker to recover their masculinity. Yeah.
How many smoking jackets do you own?
Get into politics, he writes. A virile political life will be definite and hard-hitting, respecting debate and dissent, seeking clarity and decision. Basically, he's like, to solve the crisis of masculinity, we need to redefine masculinity as like writing pithy articles for a living and political columns, you know? Which is exactly what he does. Arthur Schlesinger, a man who is not at all insecure about his manhood, does for a living.
No, but I comment on it.
Yeah, I just find that so funny. Now, obviously, in our modern era, where men still control most of the wealth and power in society, one of the best ways to profit off the masculinity crisis is to sell guys like Arthur Schlesinger, who himself was not going to make fun of his appearance, but if you look at a picture of him, not an imposing figure, right?
No.
To sell guys like that an image of masculinity they want to copy. And as we sort of started the episode with, the model is very consistent across all of the grifters today, right? And it's a guy who looks like a Navy SEAL in a movie from the mid-aughts, right? It's right? And to give you an example, they all look kind of like this, right? If there's a phenotype for manfluencers, the most common one by far, and like Andrew Tate doesn't match this, but a lot of them do, right?
Yeah.
It's this guy, he's got like kind of a military style haircut. He's got a big beard. He's either wearing a tailored suit, workout gear, or like combat gear, right?
Right. Yeah.
All of like 80% of the dudes in this space look like this. Or tailored tack gear, right?
Yeah.
Too skinny of a tie, personally.
Too skinny of a tie, beard clearly dyed, but whatever. Now, there's a million of these guys out there, but the particular guy whose photo I just showed you is named Jack Murphy. Now, Jack came up in a similar social stratus to Schlesinger and his peers. He graduated George Mason University and then went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where he earned an MA in International Affairs. He has talked about his childhood as being extremely difficult and like abusive. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Because this man's a liar, I'm really not going to get into it much. This is not a full BTB on the guy, but either way, he goes to Georgetown and he gets an MA in International Affairs, right? He gets a job consulting. This is not a poor person. This is a guy who gets a job consulting on 2 different charter schools in the DC area and eventually winds up running 2 charter schools. Barbara Smith, who worked under him and eventually wrote a book about the experience, claims that he fired off staff in order to collect 2 executive director salaries, making like $1 million in change in the few years that he's there, right? Now, during his time in power over these schools, they had the lowest family return rates for any charter schools in the district. Cool. And by the way, he is working in a majority black district. So this is a white guy who came into a majority black district, basically took over, gutted 2 charter schools, fucked them up seriously, and pocketed the money, right?
Yeah.
That's Jack's
Hey, school
background.
choice, man. We need school choice, though.
Yeah. Critically important, not just a way to empower these freaks. In 2015, the year after Gamergate, Jack realized that there was an even better con out there, blogging about masculinity. He wrote in one article that year, quote, "It is our duty as men to save the feminists from themselves. Therefore, I am offering rape to feminists as an olive branch."
Oh,
now,
this guy.
Yeah. You may have heard about him. He got a lot of he kind of broached into the mainstream a little bit when he wrote that because people were very angry about it. Unfortunately, it doesn't really hurt guys like this. We'll talk about what hurts guys like this, because the good news is that Jack is no longer a major figure in the right wing, right? Now, this guy's whole life is like a conservative fantasy, right? He like cashes in on hurting black kids particularly, and gets rich off of like running charter schools into the ground. Right. That's their dream, right? But despite this, he pretends to have been a liberal, and in 2018 writes a book titled Democrat to Deplorable, an attempt to take advantage of the fact that right after Trump's election, certain kinds of journalists, particularly at the Times, were starving to platform guys like him. And his hope was, I write this book, they'll all do to me what they did to J.D. Vance, right? Where I'll suddenly get all this mainstream legitimacy for explaining why very reasonable people used to be very liberal are now voting for Donald Trump. You know, we just got forced to, right? Now, unfortunately for Jack, he was a little late in this, right? If this book had come out in like spring of 2017, right? He might have really had something here, right? That would have been the ideal time to launch this grift. 2018 is a little late. For one thing, it's after Charlottesville, right? Like,
that's kind of the window.
That's kind of the window. You were just a little bit too late, man. I know publishing is a slow process, homie. Like, I get it. It's tough. It's tough to make those deadlines. To his credit, he saw the future of monetizing being a guy like this, though, was in selling coaching services. And so he launched The Liminal Order, where for $100 a month, young men could learn to stop being beta males. And this is almost the same grift that Andrew Tate has set up, right? Like, it's this whole thing where, like, you pay me a monthly salary to get access to a chat room where I will coach you in being, a better man, a stronger man, right? And I think there's
traffic women if it gets
how to traffic women, Tate's right? I don't know if allegedly. Jack would have gotten into that. Probably if you'd given him enough time. He also started trying to rebrand as a gunfluencer and posing in badly set up tactical gear. This just is not how you do it. You don't put the gun there, man. You don't put the gun there. You want to draw your fucking sidearm and shoot yourself in the shoulder, homie? Is that what you're looking for, bro?
What is he?
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Looks like,
who did you see holding a gun that way?
Yeah, I mean, it just clearly, it's like I saw a video game cover that looked like this, and that's what I'm impersonating.
We have, at this point, a couple of 100 years of men wearing guns professionally, and everyone agrees somewhere around the waist, right? We could debate the position around the waist, but somewhere around the waist. Not your sternum, you know?
Yeah.
What are you doing,
dude,
man?
Oh, I just clocked that. What do you have, like a Glock on his
he's
clavicle?
Got like a Glock on his fucking clavicle.
Oh, sorry. I had to turn up the contrast on my screen to be like,
fucking hell, bro.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, when you pull that thing out, you want whoever you're aiming that at. They're like, dude, this thing smells like your armpit.
Yeah, that's the right way to fucking carry a gun. My God, I know. So Jack launched a podcast where he hosted guests like Mike Cernovich and Jack Posobiec, men who had been moderately more successful than him in cultivating an audience and followers with variations of the same grift. And then near the end of 2021, disaster struck. Some of his fans found that back in 2015, he'd done something besides blog about feminism. No. He'd written about his love of being cuckolded. Now,
that's right.
This guy's a fun one. Now, Miles, being cuckolded is a perfectly fine fetish in which a man has his girlfriend or wife or whomever pick up other men and fuck them in front of him. As far as things people do in bed go, we would call this pretty vanilla where I come from. But on the right,
I watch someone have sex.
Okay. Right. Okay, sure, whatever. On the right wing, in 2021, cuck was maybe the single most popular insult. Yeah. So it coming out as you're trying to brand yourself as an influence in this space that you are literally a cuck, not gonna go over well.
Come on,
right after this comes out, Jack gets interviewed by The Blaze, and he's asked about his fetish. In a Medium post, Jonathan Paletti summarizes what happened next. He exploded at the female host. I'm not going to talk about this. And basically, fuck you for bringing this up right here and right now. Why are you doing this to me? Talking to social media afterwards, he tried to get the hosts of the interview fired. It was perceived as so unhinged as to fuel curiosity about his past. Right-wingers found themselves on a Russian porn website watching amateur masturbation videos done in 2018 for a gay audience. Called Big Bad Bear 1000, here was Jack, naked on camera, calling himself hetero-flexible and talking about his history of male-male sex. I like men, and I like boys.
Wow.
Great. The boys part.
Great stuff, bro.
Yeah, no, that's not great.
Yeah.
I mean, again, when this poor guy, you didn't have to almost blow your armpit off with a gun or any of this other stuff. You could have just lived your truth.
You could
and
have
probably
just
lived
lived
a much
your
happier
truth.
life.
Yeah.
Said you wanted
and you
to.
still could have written a bad book, you know?
Yeah.
Gay people can write terrible books too. Everyone
can.
That's your right as an
worry.
American. Yeah.
Yeah. No, don't get that pistol away from your shoulder.
Yes, don't carry a gun that way. You shouldn't have a gun at all, Jack.
Yeah.
Now, there are more influential and by the way, this guy was a fellow at the Claremont Institute. So, great stuff.
Tracks.
There are more influential far-right masculinity grifters, but I think Jack represents the pulsing insecurity at the heart of every one of these dudes. He is a human embodiment of what these crises of masculinity really are at their core and always have been. Boring men from privileged backgrounds working high-paid but useless jobs that don't make them quite enough to paper over the deep yawning void at the center of their soul. I've been pretty critical of that Schlesinger piece this episode, and I think with good reason, but I will give Arthur credit. There's a paragraph in his piece that absolutely describes Jack and a lot of these guys to a T. The pre-democratic world was characteristically a world of status in which people were provided with ready-made identities, but modern Western society, free, equalitarian, democratic, has swept away all the old niches in which people for so many centuries found safe refuge. Only a few people at any time in human history have enjoyed the challenge of making themselves. Most have fled from the unendurable burden of freedom into the womb-like security of the group. The new age of social mobility may be fine for those strong enough to discover and develop their own roles, but for the timid and the frightened, who constitute the majority in any age, the great vacant spaces of equalitarian society can become a nightmare filled with nameless horrors. Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Didn't miss on that one.
Yeah, he didn't miss on that one. I think that gets a lot of what's going on with these guys is there's this, they have freedom. They could be whoever they wanted to be.
Right.
And they see, I think this is part of, it's not all of, but it's part of like why trans people are such a constant focus for them. They see some people take this freedom that exists in our society and that to some extent was increased by the coming of the digital age. And they're angry and jealous because they don't have the courage to find or make themselves in the same way. And so they want to attack those people who are authentically creating themselves, right?
Right. And it would be much less risky to be like, yeah, I like being a cuck.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever.
That's who you are, Jack. You could have just been that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And wow, that's such a great point of to see people like where the stakes are so much higher in terms of society's acceptance of them. And like you have these other guys just like, I just want to be like a nerd or something. And that manifesting or metastasizing into that kind of anger is frightening.
Yep. Yeah. Frightening, bad, sad, but kudos to Steve Bannon for realizing this was going on and how to fucking profit off of it.
Yeah, man. Kudos to him for getting that sweet Seinfeld money too, man. And, my dad was playing his cards right, baby.
Hey, not the most toxic person involved with Seinfeld. We'll say that.
I know, right? Yeah.
Anyway, Miles, that's the end of the episode. You got anything to plug before we roll out here?
Check me out if you want to hear me talk every day about news, politics, and the like on the Daily Zeitgeist. And look, if you also want to blow steam off and hear me talk about Trash Reality Show with Sophia Alexandra, who's been a past guest on here, I'm on 420 Day Fiance. Those are the spots you can check me.
Well, check that out. And, as Miles says every year, yeah, and anyway, once we do that, we can take back our country. That's what you're always saying, Miles.
That's what I'm saying, and I ain't backing down, man.
No,
I ain't backing down.
Hell yeah, brother. Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah.
When Sophie gives me the hell yeah, brother. That's the most frightening shit ever.
So anyway, look up Miles's new fertilizer bomb recipe at Miles. I don't even know what to call that website. Miles, thanks for coming on the show. You don't sell fertilizer bombs.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're done.